Welcome back to this Full Force Articulated Points crossover special where we will rate and score the VAMP against the H.I.S.S tank and the VAMP Mark II against the H.I.S.S II in a number of different areas including design, deco, driver, features, impact, iconography, popularity, reuse effectiveness and the screen time. Pat, let's start with you and your first set of scores for the 1982 VAMP and the 1983 H.I.S.S.
Right. As far as giving it a number out of 10 score, it feels a little bit arbitrary. A lot of this stuff I would just go 10 out of 10 for everything. But the reason why I didn't is I wanted
Are you General's Joe's? Sorry, carry on.
I wanted to rate what was the more important aspects of that particular vehicle and be able to have some way of comparing them. So there is a thought process to my numbers, even though emotionally I just want to give everything a 10 out of 10.
I agree with that. And so I'll lead us in. Design. In actual fact, we'll do it one at a time for each of us. That makes sense, doesn't it?
That sounds good.
Yeah,
sounds
design first then. Pat, take us through your thought process and your scores.
Well, I gave the VAMP a 7 out of 10 on design, and that may seem harsh, but again, my numbers are based on wanting to have other aspects of these things to be higher than just the design aspect.
Well, you could say it copied something that already existed, whereas the H.I.S.S tank comes out of, yeah.
I gave it a 7, but also at the same time, I had to think about how well they translated that design into a vehicle, and the fact that it was able to be reused so many times, and as recently as just a couple of years ago for the Giggles Jeep, the design of the VAMP really has endured over the years. So it is a great design, but not as good, in my opinion, as the H.I.S.S tank, which being original, having such a defined profile, and just being the H.I.S.S tank, I gave it a 9 out of 10 because, like I said, I think that it may be the best representation of the G.I. Joe brand if you were to pick one vehicle. So
that's a good shout. Also, here's another question for you. Do you think Wayne Luther's dream was because Pythona implanted it in his head from Coke? Yeah.
Of course.
Or Globulus. I don't know. I can't remember who implanted it. It was Globulus, right? I think it was Globulus that implanted it. And he burned an image of Pythona. Yeah. In any case, he gets her sticky clam out. Right. Moving on then to Phil. Take us through why you scored it the way you did, please, sir.
Well, okay, I scored the VAMP a little bit higher. I gave it a 9 out of 10, just because I like all the little bits and features, the curves, the hidden gun that everybody always forgets about.
Yeah.
Having the big gun up on top, especially with that pom-pom action it's got going. Just the utility of it, like taking a Jeep that we all kind of have an idea in our head of what a Jeep looks like, and then making it a little bit exotic with that Italian influence. And
very true, very true.
You know, a little more futuristic too, like what we've seen before, but unlike anything else. His tank, I gave it actually an 8 out of 10, just a little bit lower. As iconic as a design as it is, there's not actually a lot you can do with it. Like I said, rotating and elevating turret, opening canopy, and rolling wheels. It feels more limited than the VAMP is, because the VAMP also has the gas cans you can pull out the back. And it has the rolling wheels, it has a rotating and elevating gun. It doesn't have a canopy, but I mean, it's convertible. It doesn't need one.
Cool. Okay. No, I can you know, deal with that one. I actually went with 9 out of 10s on both for mine because, again, I think even though the VAMP comes out of something that already existed and this, you know, the other one was a dream. I love that. You've got like you've got different ways of approaching design, but I still feel that the VAMP is executed so well. And the reason I say that is because it was used so many times afterwards. Like the H.I.S.S tank has kind of gone away and come back almost. Do you know what I mean? No, it doesn't really gone away in our heads, but in terms of the design aspect, you know, I feel like the VAMP has just stayed pretty much the same all the way through. It's almost like so versatile, and because of that, it has to score highly for me personally. But I agree with both of what you're saying, and could easily, I think, have gone either way with one pipping the other. But I felt like with the design being so iconic for the H.I.S.S tank, you can't have anything less than a 9. So that was design. Now, Pat, take us through your deco scores, please, sir.
I guess I scored the HISS tank a little lower on deco. It feels a little bit hard to say this, but I gave it a 6 out of 10 on deco because it's just a straight up a black HISS tank. And the reason why I feel like maybe I could have scored it a little bit higher is that I wouldn't want it to be a different way for the standard HISS tank. And for the VAMP, I gave it a 7 out of 10 because I do enjoy it, but it's not like we're getting camo patterns or anything on these vehicles like that, or intricate details on any of the panels.
Yeah.
Like you saw, the Action Force one called out a lot of different instrumentation and things like that. These didn't do that. So I'm not going to rate that as being the best feature of these two vehicles. I'm trying to kind of separate all these aspects out in my head because whenever we're talking design, we're mentioning some of the categories that will come later. So,
yeah, like features and stuff like that. Yeah, totally.
Yeah, so whenever I was giving my scores, I was trying to look at what all the categories you'd given me to score it upon and ignore those things as I tried to look at deco and other details.
I think with design, you can just look at the overall, not necessarily all the features, but just in general, like the design of the base bodies on both of them. But again, I still agree with what you guys are saying on both, in both arenas. What about yourself for deco, Phil?
I gave the VAMP a 7 out of 10. It's green.
Exactly. Yeah.
It could be better. Like the Revell model kit version of this actually has a camo pattern that's part of the instructions. So it could take more color for sure, but also, it works for what it is. Olive drab and black. That's very real world military.
Absolutely.
Having given the VAMP a low score for having 2 colors, I actually gave the HISS tank a 9 out of 10 for having 1 color. But I just think this goes to show what is it trying to accomplish. Something sleek, mean, and minimalist is what I think the HISS does very well. And I mean, you got to score it on what it's trying to accomplish. And I think what it's trying to accomplish, it accomplishes it very well.
Absolutely. I went with a 6 out of 10 for the VAMP and a 7 out of 10 for the HISS because I don't think either of them are, like you say, they're not that inventive. It's one base color effectively for both of them. VAMP obviously has the addition of gray, but at the same time, like, you're just talking very basic. But I definitely think the HISS wins out on this because of that black. And black is always a good one to have. Okay, next up then is the driver, Pat.
I gave Clutch an 8 out of 10. He's one of the standout figures from 1982, but obviously post-1982, Hasbro really upped their game on some of the driver figures. My Clutch always had an accessory pack visor on. It always kind of bothered me that there was no windscreen on the VAMP, and he was one of the figures that didn't have anything covering his eyes, so I just picture him going like real fast and like wind in his eyes.
Like flies, like just all over his face, yeah,
exactly.
On his teeth.
I had to take that into account and give him 8 out of 10. Whereas I gave the HISS driver a 9 out of 10. Like I said, he adds that pop of color to the HISS tank whenever you put him in there. He's almost a part of it. It feels like that's the figure that belongs in there. Whenever you show the Action Force Hyena, while I like Red Jackal,
don't say it.
I don't think he should have come with that vehicle. I think it was a bad choice because he kind of suffers for looking a little bit too much like Destro, in my opinion.
Because he's Destro. Let's face it.
Yeah,
Destro with a T-shirt.
I think that they wanted that with the Hyena. I think that they wanted that difference in color, similar to what you got with the HISS driver, but it was flipped around. Since the tank became red, they had a figure all dressed in black. Driver in black to go with that. So
we had the HISS driver in the next one, but we also had the HISS driver with the escape armor as well. We were just throwing that HISS driver everywhere at one point in the UK
because it's an awesome figure, so it gets a 9 out of 10.
Phil, what about you, mate? Clutch and the HISS driver.
Well, like Patrick, I gave Clutch an 8 out of 10. Never underestimate the power of a shoulder holster because those are inherently cool.
Big time.
So that bumps them up real high. And that and his torso was a unique piece, which is really a standout part of the 1982 assortment.
Agreed.
Whenever you get the unique sculpts, you got to jump for it in that first year. Now I'm going to be kind of controversial and say the HISS tank driver gets a 6 out of 10 from me. Ooh, low, I know.
Oh,
Yeah.
poor Pat. He just got all sad then when you said
I'll
that.
admit the figure's head is a little bit big compared to some others, but it's a big helmet.
It's proportion issues.
Or armor.
He's too scrawny. He doesn't fit in with the rest of the Cobras from '83. I mean, he sticks out like a sore thumb. Everybody's got these basic German helmets, and he's got this ostentatious ornament thing. He's outshining Cobra Commander here. Let's face it. And that Cobra logo that washes away if you look at it funny. That's gotta take some points off too.
It's because you're crying on it. That's why. I'd have to say that I'm closer, I think, to Phil's scores on this. I gave Clutch an 8 for those same reasons. I thought he was very unique looking. Love the beard. Love all of the kind of gear on his torso. Was a big fan of the Sunbow cartoon. So even though it was a different color for the most part that I saw, the episodes I saw, I did like that kind of that figure. And the H.I.S.S driver, I've given a 7. So I've given it a better mark than Phil, but certainly not as good as Pat there. And really, it's for similar reasons. Like I like the H.I.S.S driver, but I tell you what, I think it was around 25th anniversary where I got really fed up with it because it came single carded. And I think because I saw that figure so many times, like not peg warming, because that, you know what I mean? Like I saw it so often. And then the fact that it was like single carded and then the standard vehicle came with the blue version. And then I was just like, what are you doing? Like why did you even single card this figure? Makes no sense to me. Like that made no sense to me. Pat, what are you going to say? Are you going to say, it did make sense to you?
It did make sense to me. A single carded H.I.S.S driver is one of the things that carded versions of some of those vehicle drivers are things that I always wanted.
I get what you're saying.
A H.I.S.S driver on the card definitely made me happy. It made it so that you could army build the trooper, and then coming with a vehicle would be
his tank commander.
You get fewer of, so you would have, and also they differentiated that those figures didn't actually have the same head sculpt.
You're right.
Driver officer, he actually had a larger triangle on him than the carded H.I.S.S driver, which is something people overlook on that 25th.
I don't overlook it. I think my problem is with a bit OCD when it comes to the fact that, I feel like the red version should be with the black H.I.S.S tank, and I think the blue version should be with the blue. And that's just silly, pointless OCD crap that isn't even really that important.
And also, you said that you gave Clutch points for having a beard. You don't know that H.I.S.S driver doesn't have a beard.
Okay, so we'll just assume that the H.I.S.S driver has a beard. I was not expecting that.
Now he needs extra points because he grew a beard under there.
Okay, 10 out of 10. Right, no, 8 and 7 for me. Right then, features, and I'm not talking about beards. Give me your scores for features on each vehicle, please, Pat.
I gave the VAMP a 6 out of 10. It's a simple vehicle. Both of these are simple vehicles.
Yep.
But the VAMP definitely, as far as features go,
edges,
the H.I.S.S tank, because rolling wheels are a lot better than the H.I.S.S tanks. Fake wheels underneath and pretend treads, and it has the gas cans, which causes the Joes to get out and do things. But there are also some features that you didn't really see early on for either of these vehicles. One of the things that kind of became a staple for G.I. Joe later on is a removable engine cover where the Joes need to fix something inside. I think that the sides of the H.I.S.S tank, or the back of it, or the front end of the VAMP are obvious spots where they could have done some more of that. So the VAMP gets some points. Just having a steering wheel back then that was a different color inside the interior of the vehicle seemed cool to me. I always liked putting his hand on the clutch inside the VAMP. So I gave the VAMP a 6 out of 10 and the H.I.S.S tank a 4 out of 10 because it's a turret, and that's mostly it.
It's a turret on a block of cheese, isn't it? Basically, but it's still the coolest vehicle ever. Phil, features.
I gave the VAMP a 6 out of 10 again, like Patrick, but I actually initially gave the H.I.S.S tank a 3 out of 10 because of what you just said, it's the turret, but and I realized, the canopy is probably part of it too to help make it more on par with the VAMP. So I bumped it up to just a 5 out of 10. But still, for iconic as it is, it's very simple.
I went with 6 across the board here because I feel like even when you like list them out, they're actually quite similar. in terms of features. Like you say, like it's 2 figures per vehicle. You got both have got the kind of weapon systems. The HISS tank does slightly more, in my opinion, although I know there's the little like side movement on the actual gun. But like I feel like they're very similar across the board. Like again, they both on wheels. I know it's not working treads, but it's like it still moves. So they're so similar to me in terms of features. I just went straight down the middle for both. Not down the middle, just above the middle. 6 out of 10 for each. Right, let's work on impact now. And this is probably going to be the same across the board. Pat, are you saying the HISS tank's more impactful than the VAMP, like the rest of us probably are too?
That is exactly what I'm saying. This is one of those situations where, as I mentioned earlier, I wanted to just give everything a 10 out of 10. The VAMP has an amazing impact to me. The fact that whenever people see the Lamborghini Cheetah, they think that it's the VAMP.
Yes.
Even though other toys had existed prior to that.
Yeah.
Tells me that the VAMP had a huge impact. But again, I needed a little bit of wiggle room because I think that the HISS tank has had a greater impact. Not only is it one of the most iconic things from the brand, but I think that it also invited people to kind of feel like G.I. Joe, the toy line, should be more than just real world stuff. Obviously, prior to that, you had like the jump jetpack and other experimental things, heavy artillery lasers in there, but the way that the HISS tank was embraced after that makes me think that everything coming from Cobra then and later is only made more acceptable by how awesome the HISS tank is. So, and I'm changing things up here a little bit for how I'm giving my numbers because I realize these are right here. I am going to give the VAMP a 9. Is this showing up backwards probably?
It's great. It's great.
I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10. And I am going to give the HISS tank a 10 out of 10.
Brilliant. I love those cards. What about yourself then, Phil? Is it the same kind of situation?
Yeah, 7 out of 10 for the VAMP, 10 out of 10 for the HISS.
Yeah, same as me. And I've got to say, it's like it's in a similar way to Pat. I think like the HISS tank has definitely had more impact, but I think the impact that the VAMP has been, if you look at the fact of how many times it's been reused, just that alone as an impact for a vehicle. I mean, they must have made a fortune on that particular mold, you know, before having to redo it again. But you know what I mean? Like, I feel like, you know, and we'll get to reuse a little bit later, but impact wise, that is an aspect of it. So I gave that a 7 in my one. Again, this is very similar for me, but iconography, Pat.
A lot of the same things that I've already been saying about how it was important to the brand. I think that if you have just the silhouette of these things, what does that mean? You can really quickly identify the HISS tank a little bit faster than you can the VAMP, I think. And for that reason,
I'd agree with that.
I think that it's an important representation of the brand as well for the VAMP. I gave the VAMP a 9 out of 10. And I gave the HISS tank a 10 out of 10.
Amazing. And Phil?
Iconography for the VAMP, 8 out of 10. It's instantly recognizable as G.I. Joe, but nowhere near as recognizable as the HISS is for Cobra, 10 out of 10.
Yep, I went 7 and 10 on this one. 7 for the VAMP and 10. And I could probably push that to 8 for the VAMP, but I'm not going to because I've already written it down. I'm
actually changing numbers here as you people are changing my mind about some of these. Yeah.
Change them quick. What about then, Pat, in terms of popularity?
I think if somebody was going to go back and try to recollect the things from their childhood, which one of these things are they going to go after first? I gave the VAMP an 8 out of 10 because certainly it's going to be one of the G.I. Joe things you go after very, very quickly. But not before the HISS tank, which is a 10 out of 10.
Brilliant. And yourself on this one, Phil?
Popularity, I think the HISS tank just barely nudges out the VAMP here. VAMP's 9 out of 10, HISS is 10 out of 10.
Similar. I went 8 for the VAMP, 9 for the HISS tank, which is funny because you'd think like surely 10 at that point for the HISS tank, but I've gone 8 and 9. This is something we mentioned before, but reuse effectiveness. And for me, well, you'll see in a second, I've been saying it the whole time. Pat, what have you gone with here?
I think that we're kind of all on the same page here. And we talked about it. Maybe we should be polling the G.I. Joe and Cobra team who were stealing back and forth. VAMP gets a 10 out of 10.
Yes.
There isn't anything in the entire toy line.
No.
It was reused better than the VAMP.
You're right. It's not even quantity, but quality of reuse. And that's so important, isn't it? Yeah.
Retold multiple times in a short period of time.
Yep.
Got to be a color change vehicle. Eventually ended up with a Python Patrol deco from the convention.
Yep.
Yeah, so 10 out of 10 for sure. Reuse effectiveness. Give me a VAMP a year. one every year from now until the end of time. And
I agree.
I will be happy.
I agree with you.
VAMP was our only vehicle in 2007, so it did help keep it down.
That's a good point. And for the H.I.S.S tank, reuse effectiveness, mostly they have just kind of changed the color of it. I think that it was great. You pointed out the Arctic one was certainly a great reuse of.
That's the only one I think for me.
Thinking of, but I think that the classic part of me also probably more gravitates toward that septic tank as far as reuses go. So I gave it a 7 out of 10, which
not
is
bad. Not bad. I would say Arctic and septic do raise the numbers up a lot there. What about yourself, Phil?
Reuse effectiveness as a VAMP, I put it as an 8 out of 10. You're right, it is very, very modular, but I think of the H.I.S.S more as its more decos are more visible, I think. Like the Desert Striker is a great reuse of the VAMP mold, but doesn't look like a VAMP afterwards.
Well, I'm just talking about the VAMP 1982. So like everything that spurned off that, like
well, like the Desert Striker.
I suppose it does. Yeah, it does. Yeah, there's an element to retool.
It's just reshelled so much that it doesn't look like a VAMP anymore, and it kind of looks dumb afterwards with all that stuff on it.
That weird, there's a weird shape to it, isn't there? And those two huge
the roll
things,
cages stuff, and then the barrels on the back.
Yeah, I'm not a fan.
So
not a fan.
It's not an effective reuse. So 8 out of 10, still high, just not as high as it can be. And I gave the H.I.S.S a 9 out of 10 just because it's a H.I.S.S even when it's reused. And you're right, Arctic H.I.S.S, septic tank, but you're also forgetting Chimera and the.
I wasn't forgetting it
with the railgun.
I was not forgetting it. That was the weirdest thing ever. And when it was shown, the reaction was very tepid in that room. I was there. I remember it. It was almost like a because it does not feel right. The H.I.S.S tank works. Like, other repainted vehicles in the line worked for me, but the H.I.S.S tank does not work as a G.I. Joe vehicle. I'm sorry.
You think they were going for a shattered glass thing whenever they designed that?
Yeah, because it comes with a Cobra version of the Sky Striker on the side.
Also,
it's an inverse. It
does not look like a. That also made me throw up in my mouth. Because it's red and silver. Like, it's like, what? That is like really cool good guy vehicle. It's just got snake like paraphernalia. It did not work for me. It might have worked for you two weirdos, but it did not work for me.
I was not a fan of shattered glass in general, and it's something weird where G.I. Joe and Cobra can steal each other's vehicles, and that works as a rationale each time. But you've crossed the line whenever you make a H.I.S.S tank green. What is that about? I don't know.
Totally. And also that random orange one, which didn't even like properly homage the septic tank. Anyway, let's not get into that. Right. Last, but well, actually, sorry, have we done everybody for reuse effectiveness?
You haven't done yours on that.
Oh yeah, thank you. Mine, 10 out of 10 for the VAMP because the Tiger Sting, the Stinger, the Python Patrol, the Ground Assault. Come on. So many beautiful reuses. I mean, at Mark II, which we'll get onto in a little while. But yeah, so 10 out of 10 for that, and 6 out of 10 because I was taking into account Septic Tank and the Arctic H.I.S.S, which I think are two absolutely beautiful reuses of that. It's one thing just having a ton of repaints. It's another thing getting something visually different out of it. And that's where I think the Arctic H.I.S.S and the Septic Tank are just fantastically unparalleled. So yeah, that's mine. Lastly, for the scores on the version 1s, Pat, take us through your screen time, please. I know you don't have much control over this, but take us through it anyway.
It's kind of
I will also add, screen time means you know, how many times you saw it like around in all sorts of different facets as well, not just on television, but TV's a big part of this as well.
I was just going to say that in my mind, I had to try. I guess this is something that maybe actually is quantifiable, and I am not able to really quantify it myself. Maybe somebody can add up all the licensed items that these things appeared in, and add up how many minutes it was in the cartoon.
I would say that just off the top of my head, the Vamp and the Hiss are probably like head to head up to a certain point, and then the Hiss probably starts overtaking it.
That's kind of how I felt. Whenever I was mashing everything together, I had to think of also screen time of these things since G.I. Joe has come back in the early 2000s.
Yeah.
You know, what is the thing that we see the most? So
Hiss tank.
That's probably where it gets edged out by the Hiss tank. And I don't know why I was ranking these lower, probably because of the fact that you see the characters more than you see vehicles. So I actually, and maybe I'm a little bit low on these, but also I think part of me ranking these low was wanting to amp up how much the other aspects of the vehicle were important. And screen time was not the important aspect of these.
Totally.
So I gave the Vamp a 5. And I gave the Hiss tank an 8.
It's a good. I think that's a good ratio. Mine are a lot lower than yours, but we'll go to Phil first.
For the Vamp, I gave it a 4 because again, it really doesn't show up much beyond the first 2 miniseries of the cartoon. And the Hiss, I gave a 7 because that goes all the way through the end of the first season.
Yeah,
but also has appearances like, you want to get obscure, Operation Hiss, that CG cartoon they put out after Rise of Cobra. It shows up in there. And then, you know, we got World of Tanks and stuff like that, and the video games going along. So
wasn't it a giant Hiss, though, in Operation Hiss?
It was an oversized Hiss tank, but it was still the basic Hiss tank design. It's just gigantic. It was out of scale with everybody else.
Noble Command Center size Hiss.
Yes, it was.
That's what we need.
It's ridiculous. Who actually watches that cartoon? I still haven't seen it.
It's like I've just admitted to watching Operation Hiss multiple times.
I want a mobile command center that has the same feature as a Hiss 4. I want that front head to just pop up like that.
Smack him against the windshield.
For me, I went really low on this because I was really just at the time was just basing this on TV appearances. And the Vamp, I went with the 2 because it was only in like a couple of early, you know, the version 1 was only in a couple of those early episodes. And then the Hiss, like you say, I gave that 5 because it seemed to be like consistent. But then you hit a certain point in the cartoon and you see it less and less. Not saying you don't see it at all, but you don't see it as much. You know, other toys are trying to be sold, aren't they, at that point? So yeah, in any case, let's give what are our top scores then. Pat, what did you score the Vamp overall?
I gave it a 69 out of 90. That's what these numbers add up to, Chris. Not too much giggling here. I gave the Vamp 69.
Giggles cheap. Phil, what about you, mate? What did you give it? Did you give it a septic number or did you give it a giggly number?
It's a 66, actually. Slightly evil, not quite there.
Is that just spooning? 66. I think that's just spooning, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's not a bad one. I actually gave the Vamp 63 out of 90, so I really scored low on this one. And what did you give the Hiss, please, my good man, Pat?
Well, if you add up all the numbers, they come up to 73. So the Hiss tank edging out the Vamp.
Phil?
74. One more.
And I got 69.
Hey, nice.
But there's no Giggles Hiss.
Anyway, yes.
We'll make one.
The Giggles Hiss tank. So effectively, we all rated the Hiss tank higher in that one. Let's start with Pat on the version, the Mark II Vamp with design, please.
I gave it, and I put my cards away. I gave it an 8 out of 10, and I gave the Hiss 2 an 8 out of 10. And I just thought that those designs were, you know, all the things we've said so far about it being inventive and the fact that they weren't just redecos.
Good one. And Phil?
8 out of 10 for the Vamp 2 and a 7 out of 10 for the Hiss 2. Slightly lower on the Hiss 2 just because it doesn't work quite as well as the Vamp original. and slightly lower on the VAMP for the RAM1, just because so much of it is taken from the original that it's only a few more things added to it.
Yeah, for me, I went design-wise for the VAMP Mark II. I gave it a 9, and I gave it a 9 because I really like the additional aspects, the doors, the roof, the change of the weapon system. I think it made it a completely different vehicle. You got different things hanging off the back of it. I just think it's really cool, and I love that color. Really love that color, that tan color. So yeah, very, very into that. H.I.S.S 7 out of 10, which I originally wrote 9, but I think that was an error because I actually in my head I was thinking 7. So 7 out of 10 for the H.I.S.S on that one, and that's just because even though there's some really cool aspects to it that I really like, some other things, you're right, that it's a lot. It's bigger. It almost looks like a command H.I.S.S, doesn't it, that you see in the comics because it's so wide and shoddy. But I still like it. I just don't think it's as cool or cuts the same kind of silhouette as the original. Right then, DECO, please, Pat.
The VAMP Mark II, I actually didn't quite like that. Like, I tend to think of things more in green. Like Philip was saying earlier, green is what I saw on MASH. Green is what I generally associated with these things. But green is the color that I just kind of associate with these things. So it's nice to have a different option with a VAMP Mark II. Certainly, if they were going to make a color change to it, Desert Tan seemed to be the right one to do. So it was good. It was a good redeco, a very purposeful one, but I didn't want to rank it as high as the original VAMP. So I gave it a 6 out of 10. And the H.I.S.S, I think that was part of the problem. Like we talked about the greebles on the side and the silhouette, and I think that if it had the treads, that would have been of a benefit to it. But I do think that it was probably trying to compete upon color, where what it should have done was gone back to being more monochromatic and just release it in black is what I think they should have done. So I gave the H.I.S.S a 4 out of 10.
Cool. And what about you, Phil?
I have the exact same reasoning as Patrick, but different scores. 7s for both.
Oh, okay, cool. Coolsies. I actually went DECO for the VAMP Mark II. We are on DECO, yeah. I gave that an 8, and because I like that color scheme. And the H.I.S.S I gave a 7 out of 10 on that one. So slightly edging that out. We've already discussed why, basically. So yeah, moving on then, Pat, to the drivers.
For the VAMP Mark II, again, it was just clutch in tan, which, as you pointed out, was a nice way to differentiate him in the cartoon. But I gave him a 6 out of 10. And for the H.I.S.S I love the driver, but I always wondered how a head fit inside that helmet, because you see the big visor from the front, and then from the back, it's very boxy.
Like that.
You look at it from the side, and there's like cuts inside, like little louvers or vents in the back, and it's like, how big is this guy's head that he's able to fit this helmet on? So that was where my eyes always gravitated. Loved his weapon that he came with, though, and overall, a really cool looking figure. So I did give him a 7 out of 10, despite some of my reservations.
Interesting. Feel.
For clutch, 6 out of 10. It's just swivel arm clutch with the base color change from green to tan. And his track driver, 8 out of 10. I really do like that design, but again, yeah, tiny pinhead on it. Still fun design.
Interestingly, I went with a 6 out of 10 for clutch. Similar to you guys' thoughts on that one. But I only went with 5 out of 10 for the track viper, and I think it's because they're those two different like grey colors that are on him that kind of almost make it look like one part is not quite finished to me. And I think if those had been literally the same shade, or if like a different color entirely, I think I'd have vibed on it a bit more. But yeah, it looks a little kind of like they were trying a bit too hard. And also what I noticed as well is in the comics, they didn't even have a track viper in the first appearance of the H.I.S.S. I think it was Mutt and whoever else was in Millville at the time. Was it Spirit? I can't remember who it was, but basically they attacked a H.I.S.S, an inside, I think it was a viper, just a normal viper, which he punches in the face. So yeah, there was just things like that really that I thought were quite interesting. Anyway, let's talk about features on this, please. Pat.
VAMP Mark II, Obviously, it's going to be a little bit above the original VAMP for features because the addition of a roof and a door were definitely something that was cool. And it, they bothered to change the tanks in the back. What are those, water cans?
Water cans, yeah.
Yeah, they changed those up, which I thought was a nice change. Some of the slight modifications I thought were cool. On the front end as well, with I think the lights on the front bar. Yeah, but the doors, gave it a 7 out of 10. The H.I.S.S, this is where really the H.I.S.S shines, I think.
Agreed.
In comparison to the other H.I.S S. So I gave that a 9 out of 10.
Really good shout on that, yeah. Phil?
I gave 7 out of 10 for the VAMP Mark II again. I gave a 6 out of 10 for the original VAMP, so it is higher. I like the addition of the roof and the doors. The water tanks to the gas tank is kind of a wash for me. It's just kind of tanks overall. I mean, you don't necessarily have to use them for gas or water if you don't put the stickers on or if you just pretend something else. So pretty much the same concept in my brain. And then the rocket launcher, I like that in concept, but there's only 4 rockets versus, a machine gun on the back can have a couple hundred rounds of ammunition. So I think that's actually kind of a knockdown for it.
Yeah.
And then I gave a 7 out of 10 again to the H.I.S.S. It is nicer, but it's still kind of very basic on the end. The missiles don't launch, they just kind of plug in place. It's just a gun and the canopy opening, even if it's from the bottom instead of the top this time.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, so I went with features-wise, 6 out of 10 for me for the VAMP, and 10 out of 10 for the H.I.S.S tank, in much the same way as you guys just described. Let's talk about impact then quickly, Pat. What do you reckon on your Mark IIs?
I kind of think that the impact of both of these just kind of piggybacked on the impact of the originals. They kind of just are along for the ride. So
Agreed.
I gave both of them a 5 out of 5.
Nice one. And what about yourself, Phil?
5 out of 10 for the VAMP Mark II.
5 out of 10, I guess. Didn't I say 5 out of 5?
You said 5 out of 5.
Yeah, 5 out of 10 on both.
5 out of 10 for the VAMP Mark II. Again, its impact is inextricably tied in with the VAMP Mark I.
Agreed.
So I actually gave it a 7 out of 10 for the H.I.S.S just because it kind of showed a way you can change up the form on the H.I.S S tank while still making it look like a H.I.S S. So I think that element carries over into the H.I.S.S 4, the DTC H.I.S S, H.I.S.S 5, retaliation H.I.S S, is, get those treads going or the shape or something and then still make it a H.I.S S tank.
Yeah, totally. I went with 6 out of 10 for Mark II, the VAMP, and 7 out of 10 for the H.I.S S. In very similar ways, like you're right, it kind of, if you talk about the VAMP, it's the green one that most people automatically go to. And yeah, and with the H.I.S S tank is the same thing. So they're not going to have the same impact. But I definitely think the H.I.S.S 2 had a big impact in the comics. Like it was utilized quite often, quite well, and it was consistent as well. So that I thought was really cool. But yeah, I totally agree with you on that. What about iconography then, Pat?
Same thing for me as impact. Just in general, whenever you see the Mark IIs, it makes you think of G.I. Joe. It makes you think of the originals. So I went 5 out of 10 on both of those as well.
Phil?
4 out of 10 for the Mark II. It's not as well known as the original VAMP, but 7 out of 10 for the H.I.S.S 2. It's a little bit more well known than the Mark II, I think.
Interesting, you should say that. The reason I've gone with 7s for iconography on both of them is because the Mark II's been used twice now in recent times, in a mini Jada figure and also in the remote control one. So I feel like it's almost trying to fight through as the leader of the VAMPs now. Certainly not as iconic, obviously, as the VAMP.
Stop trying to make the Mark II happen. It's not going to happen.
Stop trying to make Mark IIs happen. And yeah, definitely 7 for the H.I.S.S 2 for similar reasons. We talked about impact. Popularity then, lads. Pat?
I don't know what I was really thinking, but I'm going to stick to my choices.
What were you thinking?
What was I thinking? I don't know what I was thinking. I don't know. I think maybe people tend to gravitate more toward Cobra stuff than they do the Joes, and I should consider the fact that there was a generation of people after me that were into G.I. Joe in the late 80s and early 90s. So I gave the VAMP Mark II just a 7 out of 10, and I gave the H.I.S.S 2 an 8 out of 10. Sorry.
Well, that sounds about right. Not too far off what I had. What about you, Phil?
I gave both of them 6 out of 10. I know they're well known, but they're not as popular as their version 1 counterparts.
Absolutely. I gave them 8. I went 8s on this one, 8 out of 10 for both, in a similar way. but slightly, obviously, more than you've gone there. But yeah, but not too far apart on that one. Reuse effectiveness is pretty obvious, isn't it? I mean, what about you, Pat, for this one? I mean, the Mark II was reused so well, wasn't it? The VAMP.
Yeah, it's this is when I was rating these, I felt a little bit strange because I was rating the VAMP on how well it could be reused later, and I rated the Mark II on how effective of a reuse it was. But I gave the Mark II, because it's retooled and it was in a color that made sense, 10 out of 10 on there.
Nice.
Then for the H.I.S.S, that convention one wasn't so good, but I also had to consider how well it could be reused in the future if magic happened and tooling costs were not a thing. I would still love to see it in black with just a clear canopy, but it hasn't happened, so just a 4 out of 10 on the H.I.S.S.
I think you're being really generous there. What about you, Phil?
7 out of 10 on the VAMP Mark II. You know, we get the Tiger Sting and the Danger at the Docks of VAMP, are really the only straight redos of the VAMP Mark II. And the Danger at the Docks, one of those is just a straight reissue, pretty much. I mean, it's updated tooling, but it's meant to be exactly as the original 84. So I don't know if that's necessarily a reuse effectiveness or just callback. But so 7 out of 10 for those. And then a 5 out of 10 for the H.I.S.S, just because it's more maybe the allure of the H.I.S.S-2B that I don't have. And also, you know, how good it could be if it was black.
I must say I went 10 out of 10 for the reuse effectiveness of the VAMP, because the Mark II, just because I think like the ones that it does just directly utilize are so awesome. And then also the fact that, again, taking the VAMP part out of this that we were talking about before, everything that comes after the Mark II that's then retooled, I also kind of count that as almost like the VAMP Mark II being rejigged, if that makes sense, rather than the original VAMP being rejigged. So like I'm looking at it in a similar way that Pat was looking at it as well, like how effective that particular reuse was on its own merit. And yeah, so I just kind of jumped hardcore into that. So I thought, yeah, 10 out of 10 for that. And I went 2 out of 10 for the H.I.S.S, because it's just been done once, and it was, what's the point, basically, is what I was thinking there. So yeah,
Potential. It was wasted potential.
Well, let's talk about screen time next.
As well, something a little more close to the Cobra's 1982 colors, or a Rattler color, or a Ferret color. It kind of reminds me maybe of that mail-in Ferret that was made in Brazil or Argentina. I can't remember which. But yeah, for sure, it's like that. It's a little bit of a brighter blue than I would like on my Cobra stuff. So
right then, last up is screen time, Pat.
Again, like I was trying to compare this to the originals and take into account current screen time. I guess you've said that the H.I.S.S has shown up a lot more lately.
DECO as well.
And DECO. But overall, I have to also consider what came before those existed as part of screen time. So I just gave both of them a 4 out of 10.
Nice. Phil?
4 out of 10 for the VAMP Mark II, and 2 out of 10 for the H.I.S.S 2. Because I'm trying to think, on DECO, did it show up outside of Operation Dragonfire at all? I think it was just in those 5 episodes.
It pops up. It comes up like a couple of times. I'm sure it does appear in the later episodes. It's not a lot. It's certainly not a lot. It's not
very much reduced.
Yeah. Okay, cool. In that case, I actually went quite low on these as well. I went 3 out of 10 screen time for the VAMP Mark II, because I just don't remember seeing it anywhere on anything other than, like the front of the box. And 6 out of 10 for just its DECO appearances alone, basically. So yeah, what have we got then in our totals? Pat, tell us your VAMP Mark II first. What was the total in that one?
Well, the Mark IIs are definitely going to rate less than the Mark Is, but I put the VAMP Mark II above the H.I.S.S 2, with the VAMP Mark II scoring a 58 out of 90 and the H.I.S.S 2 scoring a 54 out of 90.
Nice one. What about yourself then, Phil?
54 for the VAMP Mark II, and the H.I.S.S 2 just barely edging it with a 56.
Interesting. Yeah. Interesting. I actually found out that my VAMP Mark II edges out my H.I.S.S to 63 to 59. And yeah, I think that even though I like the Hiss, the VAMP, there's something about the VAMP Mark II that I'm just kind of drawn to, and I just think it's really, I think it's a very cool vehicle. The Hiss II though, I think the shining light of it is all of the features that it comes with, all of the different aspects that, you know, like the troop carrier aspect, the drop down jaw, all the cool stuff that you kind of wanted to see, you know, early on from that concept art. I think was done really well. But again, it's the VAMP Mark II, and actually that is the same score that the VAMP Mark I got. So samesies for me, samesies. Interesting though, lads. We've come to the end. Thank you for joining us for these deep dives into the VAMP and the Hiss tank. Massive thank you to Dan Klingensmith Jr., the author of the awesome officially licensed book series Creating G.I. Joe, to Carson at 3D Joes, and the original contributors at yojo.com for allowing us to use all these awesome images and so on, to my awesome crossover presenters from Articulated Points, Patrick Stewart and Phil Donnelly. Check them out on YouTube and all the usual socials, and of course, check out the Full Force podcast on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Podbean, iTunes and Stitcher. I have been Christopher McLeod, aka Diagnostic 80, and we have been Fully Articulated. Enjoy the rest of Armour 2 and see you on the next one. Fully Articulated?
Yeah, fully articulated.
Fully Articulated.